Great to be back with you here this morning. And I'm so glad that this last session, everybody is positive. So that way, when I get you down after this session, you won't feel so bad. That's usually what happens with my presentations. I end up being like the bearer of bad news, you know? No. Look, again, as we said yesterday, as believers, we have to understand what is happening around us. A lot of times, I hear our brothers and sisters say, well, you know, we're called to be gentle as doves. And I said, yeah, we're also called to be wise as serpents. And we have to understand the tactics of the enemy, understand what the enemy is doing. And again, we'll say it one more time. We're not talking about individual Muslims. They're not our enemies. We're supposed to love our enemies. We're talking about this Islamic movement, the spirit that is there spiritually. And this morning, I'm going to be talking about national security. I'm going to be talking about our nation and the nations of the earth in regards to the influence of Islam. One thing that I wanted to highlight on my background is that I am a former police officer. And one of the things that, one of the doors that the Lord has opened is that because of having experience running for office, I ran for office in Washington State back in 2012, I ran for governor, and then also having been a police officer, there's an opportunity to do training, and I have done training for various law enforcement agencies independently, meaning that I can't go and officially do it because of CARE. You see, we'll talk about the Muslim Brotherhood this morning. We'll talk about CARE. These are groups that are very seditious to our nation from a national security standpoint. And so CARE actually put out a list to over 6,000 police departments across the country of various speakers that if those police departments invite those speakers in, CARE will immediately file a lawsuit and file a Freedom of Information request lawsuit. I'm on that list of those speakers. So this is how they operate, by what's called lawfare. They intimidate and they threaten. And most departments capitulate. So I've told departments, don't bring me in. We do training off-site, privately, and we bring their folks in. And I just returned back from the state of Idaho where I did training. A good friend of mine is a FBI agent there, counterterrorism. And we did training there for members of Secret Service, DOD, FBI, Homeland Security, Joint Terrorism Task Force. So, but I'll tell you that what I'm about to share you today, what I'm going to share this morning is actually part of my training that I do for them. So you're basically getting a national security briefing on the Islamic threat in America. And the challenge is, these are folks in counterterrorism who have no idea who the Muslim Brotherhood is. They have no idea what they're dealing with. So just keep that in mind, that we have to, as the body of Christ, be aware of these things so that we can educate those around us, specifically, not just as pastors, as church leaders, but our elected officials. I think this afternoon, are we not going to have a talk on the Christian's role within civil government? So we need to be engaged in these things and bring truth to those who are decision makers in our communities, because it affects our very lives. One thing that I do want to preface here, we have to realize as Christians, not only are we now spiritual targets, but we are literal targets. Yes? The sad thing, the reality of having to deal with security issues, our church is the same way. We have to constantly deal with security issues. Because why? Because we're seeing churches targeted. We're seeing Christians targeted, not just obviously overseas, but even now here in America. One of the things that I think was misrepresented about the Texas shooting at the church here in Texas was the fact that, you know, there were potentially some connections to Antifa that the media just sort of briefly, there was a blip and then it went away. But there was other connections to the fact that that individual had made statements about how much he hates Christians. And so I don't hear the media talking about a religiously motivated hate crime. But you'll see when it involves Muslims, ooh, it's all over the news. So let's get in. I've titled this talk, Sabotaging America, Islam's March Towards Supremacy. I gave this talk for the first time last year in April in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, when the media went ballistic and then the Muslim community and the interfaith groups protested our event. I was there with Brandon House from Worldview Weekend. And they just went ballistic over this title. This anti-Muslim speaker, he's so inflammatory. And I said, if they just did a little bit of homework, they would realize the wording on the screen is not my words. You're going to see in a minute, it's the words of the Muslim Brotherhood. So, by the way, on the screen, this is the logo of the Muslim Brotherhood in Arabic. It's not their English logo. If you go to their English website, you don't see that logo. But if you go to Arabic sites, you see that logo. The two swords with the Quran, and this is the Arabic word for prepare. I wonder what they're preparing for. They're preparing for jihad. They're preparing for, we're going to talk about today, going to the upper house. So, there's a document that I'm going to be referencing that I, again, do in law enforcement training called the Explanatory Memorandum. I have this little booklet. Center for Security Policy puts this out. Excellent little booklet just to overview what the memorandum is. This document is a critical piece of information that actually most law enforcement do not have, and we have it available here. And I encourage people to get it, to give it to their police chief, their local sheriff, maybe even elected officials, because again, you're going to see these individuals, these elected officials, these law enforcement individuals are meeting with Muslims in the community, Muslim leaders, who the majority of the time end up being the Muslim Brotherhood. And they don't know it. They don't know who they're meeting. They don't do their homework. So the way the document came about was in 2004, there was an incident that happened in Virginia. I think it was a park ranger or a fish and wildlife. I can't remember what agency they worked for, but they observed this gal, this Muslim woman, taking pictures of the Chesapeake Bridge in Virginia, of the trusses and whatever, kind of alarming, contacted them and found out that the husband had a warrant against him, and his name was Ibrahim El-Barassi. So they run his name, they figure out he's wanted on a connection to terrorism. They execute a search warrant. In his home, in the basement, they find the sub-basement with 70 boxes of documents about the Muslim Brotherhood, including a document that is titled the Explanatory Memorandum, the Strategic Goals of the Muslim Brotherhood for North America. When you understand this document, you know we hit pay dirt. From a law enforcement standpoint, it was gold because we got the playbook. Imagine during the time of communism if we got the playbook and we said, okay, we know now what the enemy wants for us. So Ibrahim El-Barassi, he was the founder of the Dar al-Hijra Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, a mosque that was known very clearly to have ties to supporting Hamas. Hamas. We'll talk about that. El-Barassi was a member of the Palestinian Committee, which the Muslim Brotherhood has created to support Hamas in the United States. So when they hit this information, they began to realize how extensive the network was. Now remember, this is after 9/11, right? This is after 9/11, where 19 Muslim hijackers fly planes into buildings, and President Bush comes on TV and says, Islam is a religion of peace. So this blindness is not a Republican blindness or a Democrat blindness. It's a blindness if we don't seek the truth, right? Condoleezza Rice, the entire administration, this happened under Clinton, this happened under Bush, and under Bush, what happened after 9/11 was the very groups that I'm going to be talking about here this morning, they were given access to come in and brief us on how to deal with with terrorism, not the Islamic threat, with terrorism. So, in this document, which was actually written in 1991, the document goes through again their strategic plans, and on page 7 of the document is their mission statement. Now, do you think it's important if we could identify an enemy to know their mission statement? Just as I said earlier, for us as believers, we must understand the tactics of our enemy. We must understand how Satan operates, what the Bible has said about that, and therefore know how to be wise as serpents. So we were able to get their mission statement. That's a good thing. Here is the language of their mission statement from page 7 of the Explanatory Memorandum. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process. That's the word they use, by the way, is settlement. So settlement, so you and I would think, well, settlement, they're going to assimilate, right? No, it's a civilization jihadist process. Well, that doesn't sound very good. With all the word means. The Ikhwan, or that's a word for the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad. Remember last night I talked about the lesser jihad and the greater jihad. The greater jihad was the spiritual jihad internally to Muslims. The lesser jihad was what? To wage warfare against non-Muslims, mujahada, for the sake of establishing the religion, Islam. So this is what they're waging. And watch the rest of the words. In eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within. That doesn't sound very kumbaya-ish. And quote, there's the word for my title, sabotaging its miserable house. Who are they talking about? No. First, America. The church is a part of that, but America. They're talking about the United States of America. They're talking about North America. Infiltrating North America, particularly the United States, but also Canada, which they are. And its miserable house by their hands. That's who's that? That's us. So what are they saying? They're going to use us to destroy us. And the hands of the believers, that's Muslims, so that it is eliminated. What? Our miserable house is eliminated, and Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Now, I showed you last night, according to Islamic ideology, the Muslim Brotherhood is consistent in that viewpoint with Islam, because Islam is to be the final religion, right? That's their view. So those who will say the Muslim Brotherhood is not indicative of the average Muslim community are either in two camps. They're either deceived or they're deceivers. Because clearly the Muslim Brotherhood is simply trying to exercise the goal of the caliphate, as you see. It goes on to say, remember, this is a document that Muhammad Akram wrote in 1991 for the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, in the North American continent. So he's telling the Muslims, listen, without this level of understanding what he just said, that this is our goal. If you don't understand, this is our goal. So my message to the church is, if you don't understand, this is their goal. We can sit here all day long and deny. Islam is nice, tolerant, peaceful, happy, lucky go. We're just going to all get along and have PEACE. Well, sorry, I had to have one more jab at Rick Warren. I'm sorry. I apologize. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to this challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. Remember, what is jihad? It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. Now, after the lunch break, I'm going to go through, right off the bat, we're going to go through and look at what the Islamic Sharia law book says on the obligatory, meaning the mandatory nature of jihad, and whether it's communal, meaning it's for the whole community, but not everybody has to participate in the same exact way, or it's obligatory personally. And it depends on whether they're in the lower house, the house of war, or the upper house. Remember I said last night, if we don't understand the two houses, you will never understand this enemy. We won't understand their mentality. Okay? Perform jihad, is a Muslim destined to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. Now, that final hour is when Jesus comes back. Remember I said that to you? You'll see after lunch. And there is no escape from that destiny except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers and the mujahideen be equal? Certainly in the eyes of their God, Allah, the mujahideen are a step above those who are slackers. And this is very consistent with Orthodox Islamic teaching. Now, from this document, one of the things that happened was that the FBI realized, under the Justice Department or the Bush administration, that this is more insidious than we thought, because what they discovered in the document was also a list of all the front groups of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they realized, wow, they are well connected. the document itself told us who their front groups are. As I said, this is hitting the jackpot. And as such, they started a trial called the Holy Land Foundation trial, because what they found out is that there was basically a funneling of money. Well, let me go back a step this, and I'll cover this in a minute, but I got to explain it here. In 1987, there was a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, meaning one of the front groups, called the IAP, the Islamic Association of Palestine. So they needed to raise money for Hamas. There was no Hamas at that time, basically meaning Gaza, the Palestinian cause. So in 1987, they transitioned from the IAP and they created Hamas. But they knew the United States government then labeled Hamas a terrorist organization. So the Muslim Brotherhood had to realize we have to mask it. We got to cover it. So they came up with a front group to be the cover for Hamas, CARE. And they said, we have to get money. We have to funnel money. So they started certain charities. One of them was right here in Texas, called the Holy Land Foundation. So this charity was basically a front charity where they were raising money, but they were sending it to Hamas, right here in Texas. And so the federal government started the HLF trial, the Holy Land Foundation trial, where they began with the indictment of 5 senior members of the Muslim Brotherhood based on 70 boxes of evidence, including the explanatory memorandum. And they indicted these members and certain groups. Now, initially, they went after the 5 members. They got indictments on them. They charged them. They convicted them. Then they were beginning to build the case against the front groups. So it was individuals first, then the front groups. And in the indictments, they list, as you can see, individuals, but they also list groups. So here's the Islamic Society of North America, a.k.a. ISNA, the Muslim Arab Youth Association, a.k.a. Maya, the North American Islamic Trust, a.k.a. NATE. They own 70+% of all the mosques in America. Here you have, continuing on, again, individuals, and look at number 11, the Council on American Islamic Relations, a.k.a. CARE. There's the IAP. So they listed, they brought indictments against these groups, and they're ready to indict them. This trial was 2008. Then we had a regime change. When President Obama came in, the Justice Department changed. Eric Holder. FBI changed. Robert Mueller. Obama ordered, well, we don't have evidence he actually ordered it, but it was shut down. Where did it come from? The trial was shut down. They shut down the trial. They shut it down. Gone. They took all the evidence. We don't know where it went. There's still an outstanding subpoena from Congress to the Justice Department for all this evidence. Somewhere. We just don't know where. And what happened was, when that happened, all of these front groups and individuals that were waiting to be indicted, they became known as unindicted co-conspirators. That's the official term that's given to them. Unindicted co-conspirators, because no one's going to indict them. There's no prosecutor from the Justice Department that's going to indict them because they've been given orders to shut the trial down. Now, here's what happens within a year of the trial shutting down. By late 2009, these same groups, ISNA, CARE, ICNA, the Islamic Circle of North America, they then are allowed, which I'll talk about a little bit later, they then are allowed to be given access to the national security and counterterrorism apparatus, meaning every training material, training manual, PowerPoint, video, they're allowed to go in and audit. So the same people that a year earlier were on trial and about to be indicted as a bunch of terrorists, a year later, Robert Mueller and the Justice Department under Holder allows them to go in and audit all of our materials. This is national security, classified training, counterterrorism training materials. Everything got absolutely flipped upside down. And remember, the Christian community voted Barack Hussein Obama into office. Twice. Let's not forget that. I had many friends that I had gone to church with who voted. Because where has it gone to this point? Can I say this in a moment here? Where has it gone to the point? There's a little wristband that I wear. I don't have it on this morning. Because I was tired of hearing all of this stuff coming. And we hear it today from Reformed churches, from evangelical churches, from emergent churches. All this nonsense about white privilege, white this or black this. Why are we at a point as Christians where we're looking at the skin color of people? So here's what I said. I said, instead of white supremacy, black supremacy, we should be talking about Christ's supremacy. Right? That's what we should be living for as believers. We shouldn't look at the skin color of the person. But we're buying into these the attempts of the enemy to bring unnecessary division. And sadly, as you know and I know, many people voted because of those issues rather than looking at content of character and what someone was saying. Now, let's move on. From that point, we saw a shift, folks, a major shift in the engagement of the Islamic threat, meaning, and you'll see it in a little bit, it was completely gone. There was no assessment of the Islamic threat. And basically, from that moment on, when I started talking to law enforcement, because I had just, in 2009, I was just coming out of law enforcement and preparing to run for office, so I had still friends. I had a friend of mine who was in ICE, FBI, and they were starting to tell me, Shahram, this administration is tying our hands. We can't do our job. My friend who was an ICE agent, 27-year veteran. They do these raids. The next day, cut them all loose. FBI agents were being told, you no longer have permission to just openly investigate Muslims. You have to get permission from us. And this progressively got worse. So again, I'll talk about that in a minute. But very quickly, I want to go back, or not back, but I want to go and talk about the background of the Muslim Brotherhood. Because this is something that even, again, law enforcement has no clue. So who is the Muslim Brotherhood and where do they start? The Muslim Brotherhood was basically a revivalist movement. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, ultimately in 1918, there was a movement in 1928 by a guy named Hassan al-Banna to say we need to revive the caliphate, as I said last night. But the caliphate cannot any longer be in an empire form. It's too easy to defeat. We need a global movement for the caliphate, the global Ummah movement, Ummah meaning the Islamic community. And therefore, let's start a brotherhood. And the brotherhood is going to be focused on one goal: revival and establishment of that global caliphate, meaning every nation ultimately would seek to be under the rule of Islam and Islamic law. And it's not good enough for a nation just to be Muslim populated. Remember, Iran was Muslim populated. Remember, Egypt was Muslim populated. Remember, Libya was Muslim populated. Remember, Syria is Muslim populated. But what happened in those nations, the so-called Arab Spring? What happened was they went from being a monarchy or a dictatorship, because in Islam that is against Sharia, to then becoming Islamic. When Obama and Hillary Clinton gave $8 billion to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and overthrew Hosni Mubarak, and we were in the streets going, wow, fantastic. There was those of us who were going, no. This is an Islamic uprising, not an Arab Spring. And very quickly, the Muslim Brotherhood got established in Egypt and began to increase persecution. And they actually were telling the Israeli government, we're going to tear up the Sinai Agreement, the Sinai Peninsula Agreement, and we're going to allow Iranian warships to come in through the Suez Canal and park off the coast of Tel Aviv. And as you know, 2011, there was a coup with El-Sisi militarily, which I think was a saving grace of Israel. But 1928, al-Banna started it, reviving the caliphate. Now, here's what most people don't know. They do not know that the Muslim Brotherhood was deeply embedded and connected with the Nazis in World War II. In fact, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, he was a disciple of al-Banna. So he became the Grand Mufti. And there are numerous videos on YouTube. I usually show them. I don't have time this morning. Where then, this is the single meeting between the Mufti and Hitler, But what happened was that he became basically outcast from quote-unquote Palestine. Remember, there was never a Palestine, right? But he became outcast from the region which the British were coining Palestine, and actually went to Germany. And from Germany, he was broadcasting radio to the Arab world to get them to support the Nazi cause. And they started at least 2 SS Handsecker divisions that were predominantly under the control of Muslims. Waffen SS Handsecker division. One was in North Africa, and one was in Bosnia, the 2 major ones. So Muslims fought alongside Nazis in World War II. And the Muslim Brotherhood, at this point already established, was supporting Adolf Hitler and fascism. You go, well, what would they have in common? Many things we can talk about, including the fact that Islam is a totalitarian ideology, and so was Nazism, right? Socialism leading to what? Fascism leading to ultimately totalitarian control. How many of our young people in our churches today, so-called Gen Z Christians, are believing that socialism is good? And believe, have you heard this? Jesus was a socialist. Did you know that? Did you know that? Yeah. He told us that, we should give everything to the government will take care of it. Did I miss that somewhere in the Bible? But the greatest thing that they have in common is a spiritual joining. Because they're both operating at the behest of Satan. Because Islam, just like Nazism, is inherently anti-Semitic. In fact, many will say, and I've read books on this, a couple of books on this, and several articles, that there was a division over who really came up with the final solution. Because apparently there was some talk that the Nazis were going to simply vacate the Jews, meaning kick them out. But al-Husseini said to Hitler, we don't want them in Palestine. That's our land. And apparently there was some discussion about, again, how was the final solution brought up? In one of the videos that you can go on and watch on YouTube, and I have it on my computer again, I just didn't have time to show it, but you can see that al-Husseini met with Himmler. And they're discussing the death camps. They're talking about it. So al-Husseini, meaning the Muslim Brotherhood, was absolutely aware of the final solution. Even if they didn't come up with it, they were totally aware of the final solution. So what do they have in common? How about a hatred for the Jews? Here's a hadith, Sahih Muslim, second quoted hadith, and then I'll share one with you tomorrow, where it is directly from Muhammad himself. The prophet said, the last hour, again, when Jesus comes back with their Messiah, would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims would kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, or a stone and a tree would say, Muslim, or the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. You will see tomorrow that they believe Jesus is going to come back and actually lead an army and kill all the Jews. And this is not radical Islam. This is fundamental teachings of the Prophet of Islam himself. That's why I said last night, Islam is the most anti-Semitic force, I believe, on the planet Earth. I mean, given the fact, other than Satan himself, for the hatred of God's people. The Muslim Brotherhood, from that point, 1928, then Second World War, in late 1950s, they merge and they come into the United States. We start seeing footprints of them in the U.S., and they start their very first front organization. Who wants to guess what they targeted first? Schools, very good. They start the MSA, the Muslim Student Association chapters on college campuses. Just like the communists. Target the youth, target the next generation. If we do that, we're going to have them, right? And then again, we know they're going to have to target the church and the family as well. So the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, this is their motto. So our government to this day, the United States government to this day claims that the Muslim Brotherhood is a secular organization. At least the North American Muslim Brotherhood, because they claim, well, that brotherhood here is not the same brotherhood that Egypt has declared to be a terrorist organization. That, by the way, the United Arab Emirates has declared to be a terrorist organization. That, by the way, even the United Kingdom has declared to be a terrorist organization. But we say, no, they're benign, they're secular. Let's look at their motto. Allah is our objective, the Quran is our law, the Prophet is our leader, jihad is our way, and death for the sake of Allah is the highest of our aspirations. Now, you were here last night. If you were here last night and I taught about Islamic ideology, is that not consistent with Islamic ideology? Okay? Allah is the objective. The Quran is their law. Sharia is their law. The Prophet is the only leader. Remember, he's the final prophet. Jihad, right? The lesser jihad, the greater jihad. It is the warfare against non-Muslims. And what's the highest goal? The culture of death, to die as a martyr. That's why the mission statement of the Brotherhood said, if we don't realize that we have to wage jihad, then you're not up for the challenge. The Brotherhood is telling Muslims in North America, if you're not up for this challenge, don't get in the fight with us. So, again, are there unsuspecting Muslims? Of course there are. But we're not talking about the unsuspecting average Muslim. We're talking about this entity today. As I said earlier, in 1987, the IAP transitioned to Hamas. So Hamas, that today runs Gaza, right? Have you been to Israel? Right? You have the West Bank that is ruled by Fatah, right? Abbas. Then you have Gaza that is ruled by Hamas. They're actually elected, supposedly, by the people. And so in 1987, they formed Hamas. But again, the U.S. government, because subsequently labeled Hamas as a terrorist organization, they had to be able to shift and create CARE to cover that front, which, as I said, led to the Holy Land Foundation discovery because they were funneling at least $12 million to Hamas, which, by the way, the moment it's a terrorist organization, that means any support of terrorism, right? It's material support of terrorism. That's a federal crime. It's a felony, and therefore they can come after you. Now, let's move on. We got to move on here. The front groups, as I've already mentioned, some of them CARE, ISNA, ICNA. The MSA means the Muslim Student Association. Almost on every major college campus and university in America. And very concerning now, we're seeing MSA chapters on high school campuses. They're sponsoring them because they're simply just a charter and they're just simply, a gathering. You'll see that later tonight. The Muslim American Society there is the MAS. Now, North American Islamic Trust I mentioned, right? This is an important one because these are the ones who own the mosques. So if you find the mosque that is owned by the North American Islamic Trust, in law enforcement, we call that a clue. Because that means that mosque is Muslim Brotherhood. Does that make sense? It's a level 1 connection. Didn't, by the way, take a rocket science to figure that, right? You think more of our law enforcement community would figure this out. So this is what happened to us. We were in Sioux Falls, South Dakota last year. Again, when I said we had this protest, it's just one of many examples, but here's one that was personal to us. We were in Sioux Falls last year giving this talk, Worldview Weekend Conference, 500 people. And because the media got, the Islamic Center of Sioux Falls had a meeting about 10 days before we got there on hate groups. And because our ministry, the Till Project ministry, is on the SPLC hate list, they said, a hate speaker is coming into town. And so the Muslim Brotherhood, along with the Interfaith Coalition, decided to do a protest. And they protested, okay? Well, that was fine. That was their legal right. But what happened was then, in between that is when the heavily armed Muslim man came in. If you guys don't know that story, I'll tell you another time. But before we got there, we did a little homework because I went online and I found out that the Islamic Center of Sioux Falls had been doing outreach events to local law enforcement and elected officials. Bringing them into the mosque, having a nice meal, catering them, being really, really nice. So we did a little homework. We said, well, I speculate, could this Islamic Center be owned by North American Islamic Trust? So we contacted our colleague, John Guandolo, former FBI agent, counterterrorism expert. He has a program. He was able to look up county records. You can't see it here. It's a little small. But when we pulled up that property address, very clearly under the owner's name, it says North American Islamic Trust. 30 minutes. Took us 30 minutes. We're not active law enforcement, right? Retired law enforcement. 30 minutes it took us to find that out. Yet the Sioux Falls Police Department couldn't figure that out, or they didn't want to figure that out. So when what happened to us, and this heavily armed Muslim man threatens our conference and is making Facebook Live videos and goes out in the car and threatens us on Facebook while the conference was going on. We were having a conference like this, had no idea he was out in the parking lot making Facebook Live videos, brandishing multiple weapons and 1,200 rounds of ammunition. Made 4 videos. The 4th one back at his apartment where he was taking bullets out of his magazine saying, "This is for you, halal. These are halal bullets." So we sent those videos the next day to law enforcement, to the FBI. We sent them to the fusion centers. That night, the FBI visits the guy and they asked him the question, "Did you have any intent to harm?" And he said, No, I was just upset." "Why did you have 1,200 rounds of ammo and 5 weapons in your car?" He said, "That's how I roll." In fact, he was wearing a shirt when he walked in the event that said, I'm a Muslim, I'm an American, I open carry, I conceal carry, I don't have a problem with you unless you're stupid. That literally is what he said. So when, if there was any doubt he was a Muslim, he was wearing a shirt that says, "I'm a Muslim." So that made it a little easier for us on that front to figure out if he was actually a Muslim. Because, law enforcement has a hard time when there's an attack saying they're actually a Muslim or, they're shouting Allah Akbar. And they go, well, but it has nothing to do with Islam. You know what I'm saying? It's workplace violence. So when we found out that the local Sioux Falls Police Department had been invited to this Islamic Center for outreach, it gave us every answer we needed to have. Because this Saudi man who threatened our conference, they said within 38 hours, the prosecutor, who, by the way, was a Republican, came out and said, this man did nothing wrong. He was simply exercising his First Amendment and Second Amendment right. Now, you flip the situation. If one of us went to a Muslim conference with a shirt that says, "I'm a Christian, I'm American, I'm armed," whatever, and threatened, you think it would go the same way for us? No. So we went public with the story, blasted it out there, and it went around the world. And finally, on day 12, it was the Attorney General of the state of South Dakota that arrested the man. Not the county prosecutor, not the police department. They continued to say he did nothing wrong. And we said, you know what? I'm tired of the FBI saying, after every single one of these shootings, we knew them, we investigated them, but we couldn't do anything. Not this one. The blood is not going to be on our hands if this guy goes off. And so fortunately, he was charged with a federal crime. We found out he was also on meth when he came in. And he's lost his weapons. He can't vote. He's now a federal felon. But that took a lot of effort from our side. So here's in Spokane, Washington, our largest mosque there where I am. Owner, North American Islamic Trust. My friend who's a state legislator found that out in about 15, 20 minutes. And yet, the city council of Spokane 2 years ago gave an award to CARE. We don't know for what. For great community service. The sheriff of Spokane County met with CARE. With CARE. The same group that's supposed to be a front for Hamas. So, here's where I want to shift for the rest of our time. I've given you some background. Again, normally when I give this presentation, it's like a 4 or 5 hour presentation, so I'm condensing it this morning. But I want to give this background to you because remember last time we talked about the 2 houses of Islam. Dar al-Harb, the house of war, Dar al-Islam. Remember that? Dar al-Harb means the house of the unbeliever, so it's a house of war. They're at war. Within the house of war, there are certain things that are permitted. Muslims, by the way, are permitted to not have to follow the latter verses if they can't, meaning if they need to look Western, if they need to dress Western, if they need to act Western, they can't observe all the things of Islam. That is permissible in the lower house, not permissible when they go to the upper house. One of the other things that's permissible in the lower house, well, I already told you they can say things like there's no compulsion, things like that. But one of the things that's permissible in the lower house is there's lying permissible in the lower house. Probably the most well-known lie that people know about is what's called taqiyya. But taqiyya is not the only lie that's permissible. That's called the lie of conscience, meaning if the Muslim has to protect their conscience, they're permitted to lie to the unbeliever. You go, what? Would you be surprised that in the Sharia law book, classic manual in Islamic law, there's a section in here on permissible lying? Can you tell me the place in the Bible that gives us the permission to lie? Which one? David? Well, yeah. Exactly. Thank you. As Dr. Wood said, that was not prescriptive. That's not what God ordained for them. Exactly. Allah prescribes lying. In fact, as I'll talk about tomorrow briefly, but I'll mention it here, one of the 99 names that is given to Allah in the Quran, there's 99 Arabic references to him, is the terminology Allah Khairul Makrin. The word makra, from the root of the word makrin, means deceiver. The word Khairul means he's the chief of or the greatest of. And the context of that is in Surah 3 to Surah 4, because they were actually talking about the crucifixion. And I'll talk about that tomorrow. But one of the 99 names given to the God of Islam is he's the best or the highest of the deceivers. So prescriptively within Islamic texts, lying is permissible. And the other lies that we see is a lie of kitman, which means a lie of omission. You'll see some of that tomorrow in one of the videos I'll play. The lie of maruna, the lie of blending in. In fact, even ISIS now is telling their fighters, listen, stop wearing a jihadi beard and looking jihadi. Blend in. Because it's a strategy of war. Remember, they're in the house of war. The big question that I always get is, well, Shahram, how do we know if they're going to the next house? Because for at least 7 years, we've been hearing out of the mosque, and that's where we have to pay attention. This is why we need to monitor these Muslim Brotherhood mosques, which, like in New York, because of their mayor, they can't do anymore because there's profiling. So the mosques are the ones who are telling us, like in Europe, 7 years ago, they started saying, Europe is now Dar al-Islam. We've now gained the upper hand because they don't need 50% of the population. And I'll talk about that after lunch. So there are some key things to look for and to identify how do we know if they're going to the upper house. Now, as I said, you have to monitor the clerics. You have to monitor what is being said out of the mosque and in Arabic, not in English. Remember the Muslim Brotherhood logo? Arabic versus English. They'll say something very nice in English. You have to look at what they're saying in Arabic on their Arabic sites to really figure out what they're saying about you and I. So number one tactic of the Brotherhood in preparing for the upper house is playing the victim card. We're the victims. Islamophobia. We're the victims. Islamophobia. We're the victims, right? You'll see that tomorrow. As I said to you now, the Pew Research poll that I just read last week, among Democrats, women, and those under 40, there's now a majority of people that are believing that Muslims are greater victims here in America, meaning they're mistreated in America more than Christians are mistreated around the world. And that's part of the narrative because it sells. And when you have a social gospel-led church that's all emotional, we buy the narrative, right? Because God forbid that we would want to offend anybody. We don't want to offend anybody, man. We just want to love. Second thing to look for, and I'll give you examples of these, going from Sharia denial, meaning we don't want Sharia in America. No. To Sharia defense, oh, well, you don't understand. You just misunderstood. To Sharia promotion. I'll give you an example in a minute. We start seeing them go hyper-political. We start seeing infiltration of law enforcement and counterterrorism. And you're going to start seeing a purging of any national security structure that deals with the real Islamic threat. This is everything, by the way, that happened in Europe. So what we're talking about here is not something that's theory. We know because it's all happened in Europe. And that's why, again, we've been monitoring out of the Islamic centers and mosques in Europe for at least 7 years. They've been declaring we are now Dar al-Islam in Europe. So I'm going to play a quick video here because, in the midst of all this heavy stuff, we should have a little levity, right? You'll see after the video, it's not really funny. But here's a video that the Muslim Brotherhood group CARE put together to deal with the first challenge for them, Islamophobia. Are we ready for the audio? Watch this video of them decrying Islamophobia.
Do you think your neighbor is a terrorist?
Hey, how you doing? Hey! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
Does your fear of Muslims get in the way of living a normal life?
No! He's coming!
Did you call an Uber?
Fine.
Yeah, we'll take the next one. It's fine.
All right.
Okay. You saw the app.
I didn't
saw
know.
the picture, you
I
saw
didn't
the
know.
video.
It
How
said
did you
Mo.
not know?
I didn't know.
Do you judge people by their outer appearance? Introducing Islamophobin, now in an easy and convenient chewing gum. Starts working within 5 minutes to relieve bigotry and intolerance. Call your doctor if your Islamophobia worsens or you have hallucinations that discrimination isn't real. Side effects include fondness, brotherhood, acceptance, loss of bigotry, increase in rationality, and possible denouncement of superiority.
I didn't realize I had a problem, but admitting is the first step.
Islamophobia worked for me. Ask your doctor if it's right for you.
CARE literally put this on Amazon. Now, I don't know what was in the package, if they actually had gum in it or not. Notice that statement in there about fighting superiority, fighting the urge of being superior. Whose words were superior? Whose words speak of supremacy? We're going to eliminate and sabotage your miserable house and establish Allah's religion as the final religion. Doesn't that sound a little superior to you? And so this stuff sells, right? It sells. And the Brotherhood has marketed, and you'll see tomorrow when I talk about interfaith dialogue and how they're coming into the churches to train Christians to recognize Islamophobia. I'm not kidding. God help us in how deeply we're being infiltrated. Now, the next phase after the victimization call and the Islamophobia call is the defense. So here we have Linda Sarsour, again, a known Islamic activist, Muslim Brotherhood operative, and pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine. Starting with sort of the defense, we start seeing moving from now denial to defense. In America, we are at the defense of Sharia mode, getting closer to the promotion of Sharia mode. Sharia law is reasonable, and once you read it into the details, it makes a lot of sense. People just know the basics. I don't drink alcohol, don't eat pork, I follow Islamic way of living. That's all Sharia is, right? You see the defense. You'll know when you're living under Sharia law if suddenly all your loans and credit cards become interest-free. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Because under Sharia law, Muslims are not permitted to pay interest. For example, in Seattle, our mayor, our former disgraced mayor, who was a homosexual and a pedophile, had 6 charges against him. They were trying to create Sharia financing products. This is a $500 million industry worldwide, where banks, major banks that you probably have a credit card from, create loan products for Muslims. So they get a loan, like you and I, but they don't pay interest. They pay an upfront fee, but they don't pay interest. Are those loans available to you and I? No. What happened to equal protection under the law? So they're starting to promote it. If you're still paying interest and Sharia law hasn't taken over America, really? 10 weeks of paid maternity leave in Saudi Arabia. Yes, paid. And you're worrying about women driving puts us to shame. Yeah, because the Saudi government has been really good at the treatment of women. They now finally have partial voting rights. And they finally now have partial rights to drive in Saudi, women. Partial. But, they routinely stone and behead women for adultery still in Saudi. The government that has no church and no synagogue in its country. And Linda Sarsour is promoting that. You see the promotion? They're trying to normalize Sharia and promote it. These are all signs that they're getting ready to go to the upper house. Whoops, I went too fast. And here's the SPLC joining forces with the Muslim Brotherhood. Islamophobes have been attacking Women's March organizer. Remember, she organized, by the way, I forgot to mention, she was one of the co-organizers of the Women's March after President Trump got inaugurated last year. We stand with her against this type of hate and bigotry. I march with Linda. Because you'll see tomorrow, the SPLC that labels us as a hate group does not have one Muslim Brotherhood group on its list as a hate group. Now, here's another sign, hyper-political. We got to move on. The Muslim Brotherhood going hyper-political. We saw 2015, the Muslim Brotherhood started the first Muslim Brotherhood or Muslim political party. The first religiously affiliated party in American history that we know of. Meaning specifically only Muslim. The United States Council of Muslim Organizations, various Muslim leaders. There's a guy named Osama Jamal who's the leader, Nihad Awad, the head of CARE there. Then we see them going hyper-political by not only running, but when they get elected, they put their hand on the Quran. Remember Keith Ellison from Minnesota, right? First Muslim elected to Congress. He took his oath on the Jefferson Quran. Maybe we should understand why Thomas Jefferson had a Quran, understand the background of the Barbary Pirate Wars, understand that here's a trivia question for you. What is the very first war that America fought as a new independent nation? The Barbary Wars, not the War of 1812. It was the Barbary Wars against Muslims. Remember the Marine hymn? The shores of Tripoli, the leathernecks. Why were they called those things? Because they were fighting Islamists. And we don't even know our history. Keith Ellison, of course, has now become the vice chair of the DNC. And the majority of Muslims, they created a PAC, Justice, Education, Technology. The majority of Muslims that are running for office openly now are running on social justice causes. That sells with not just the left and the liberals, but also many Christians. Here's some examples. Ilhan Omar, first Muslim Somali elected to the Minnesota legislature. They made a doll for her. This is actually called a hijabi. I'm not making that up. They actually have hijabis. Yeah. Here is, you can't see on the screen here, Abdullah Mahmoud in Michigan from Dearborn. Representative Mahmoud taking his oath of office in the legislature. His hand is on the Quran. Abdul Al-Sayed is running for governor in Michigan. They're already calling him Obama 2.0. 32-year-old handsome guy, articulate doctor. He's got the backing, of course, of the Democrat Party, CARE, and many Catholic groups in the state of Michigan. Now, if you go to his website and you look at what he's standing for, it's all social justice progressive causes, including the support of LGBT rights, pro-choice. You go, well, why would Muslims support that? Because they're in the lower house. Very good. You get it? It's a house of war. They'll lie and deceive to get into power. And then when they get into power like Europe, guess who they turn on? All the feminist groups, all the LGBT groups, all of them secular humanists that help the Muslims to get up to where they are in Europe, now they're being turned on. Have you seen the attacks in some of these enclaves in Great Britain and France and Sweden on women, on homosexuals? They're being run out of those areas by these Muslim gangs that take over. So hyper-political is something to really watch for. It's very concerning. We've had, again, particularly at the local level, there's a lot of city councils that they're running for. I'll talk about after lunch, where we're seeing Parks Board, county commissioners, city council, and it's becoming normative practice. Every time they get sworn into office, they put their hand on the Quran, not the Bible, and swear an oath to defend our Constitution. Really? Because the Quran is clearly against any man-made law, which is the way they view the Constitution. I'll talk about that tonight. Now, infiltrating law enforcement, CARE. I want to show you a video here about Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel. Remember after the Parkland shooting? They're planning more protests. The young people are going to protest for more gun control. So I want you to watch this video talking about not just him, but his deputy, the deputy sheriff for the Broward County Sheriff's Office. Watch this video and see how troubling it is.
Really not taking any responsibility for the multiple red flags.
Oops, sorry.
The attention of the Broward Sheriff's Office.
I've given amazing leadership to this agency.
Amazing leadership?
I've worked. Yes, Jake.
Scott Israel is Jewish, but he's never had any hesitation about showing his affection for hardcore Islamic jihadis.
Surround yourself with like-minded individuals. And that's what leadership is all about.
So when Nizar Hamzi, a devout practicing Muslim of Lebanese descent, applied for a job with the Broward County Sheriff's Department in 2014 for the second time, neither his admitted past illicit drug use nor complete lack of law enforcement or military experience seemed to matter. Nor did failing a polygraph, a lie detector test. Neither did Hamzi's open affiliation with CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, the Hamas branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in the U.S., yes, that Hamas, the one that the U.S. Department of State lists as a terrorist organization. Not only was Hamzi affiliated with CARE, he worked for them as Regional Operations Director for the Florida chapter. So maybe it was a recommendation letter from Wilfredo Amir Ruiz, who was a civil rights attorney for CARE Florida, and also the legal advisor for the American Muslim Association of North America. These are the two groups, Amana and CARE, who stood on a street corner in Miami yelling, Whatever the case, Sheriff Israel seemed happy to have Hamzi by his side when he and fellow Broward County Sheriff's Department officers went to known jihadi mosque to let them all know how happy they were to stand in front of a bookcase that contained the Islamic Shahada, statement of faith, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet.
Anytime is an honor.
Sheriff Israel claims he's provided amazing leadership for Broward County. If he means embracing Florida's Muslim mafia instead of Florida's kids, then maybe he's right. That is amazing.
So Nizar Hamzi is now the deputy sheriff of Broward County. And the video that you saw at the end there where they were in the mosque, if you go to YouTube, you can see that video. He gets up there and he does the announcement before he introduces Israel. And he's saying, he goes up there and goes, Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah that he's here. How many sheriff's deputies you know in uniform go to a church and stand there and go, praise be to Jesus Christ? Would that be allowed today? Or do you think they get fired? In uniform. But this happens in mosques all the time. And that mosque that they just talked about very clearly connected the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, that's fact. We can prove that. So either these individuals, the law enforcement, are ignorant, maybe they don't know and they're being deceived, or like Nizar Hamzi, they are deceivers. CARE, working as a sheriff's deputy. CARE, Hamas. And they're normalizing it. This is a breach of national security. Do you understand? This is treason. And we're treating it, sitting here like it's no big deal. We've had multiple CARE leaders convicted of jihadi crimes, including police officers. I don't have time to go through these. Just a list of 5 of these guys that have been arrested over the last number of about 7 years. By the way, under President Trump, CARE has gotten even more bold. Maybe it's because they felt threatened at first, but they've actually gotten bolder. We got to move on. We don't have a lot of time left. One of the things that I want to quickly touch on, and we'll talk about after lunch, and I mentioned this to some of you guys, is the purging of Islamic terms. Remember I said to you, 2009, when they came in and Robert Mueller allowed them access to all the training materials? This is the result of that. Here's the quick fruit of that. Before 2009, the 9/11 Commission report came out with a report about the causes and motivation of the attacks on us. and look at the references to the word violent extremism. Only 3 references to the word violent extremism as a cause for the attacks on 9/11. Look at the references to Islam. Jihad mentioned 126 times, Muslims mentioned 144 times, Islam mentioned 322 times, the Muslim Brotherhood mentioned 5 times as causes, motivation, factors in the 9/11 attacks. After the 2009 Justice Department coming in, when they allowed the same unindicted co-conspirators, Isna, Care, Ikna, to come in and audit, there was what Phil Haney, who was a whistleblower for Department of Homeland Security, a patriot, calls the first purge, the 2009 purge. Here is what happened subsequently. Now you start seeing the word violent extremism used. FBI counterterrorism lexicon, national intelligence strategy lexicon, strategic plan to prevent violent extremism. Look at the references. Now it's all about violent extremism. And by the way, who are the most violent extremists? White Christians, right-wing Christians. You know those Bible thumpers who hold on to God and their guns, as Obama said, remember? Clinging. But here is, look at the shock. There is no reference to Islam having anything to do with terrorism. So now you understand why when these attacks happen, law enforcement goes, workplace violence, he was suicidal, he was depressed, he was on medication, had nothing to do with Islam. Look the other way. We see all of these attacks happening, especially when the guys are yelling Allah Akbar as they're killing people, nothing to do with Islam. Because they have completely been purged and eradicated every piece of training material, including, by the way, may I add, they purged the explanatory memorandum. So when I go to do law enforcement training and I say the counterterrorism folks, how many of you know about the explanatory? Nobody raises their hand. They don't know unless they've been taught by me or others that this is the playbook of the Muslim Brotherhood and they should know it by heart if they're going to deal with the quote-unquote extremist threat in America. Because look, statistically, while there are quote-unquote white supremacists and white terrorists, a small percentage, the majority of the FBI's cases are dealing with Muslims and terrorism. And the final thing I want to cover here for you today, and then we'll get more into it after break, is the fact that one of the things that we have to be also aware of as the preparation of going to the upper house is when we see these Islamic groups forming coalitions with other groups, just like we saw the Muslim Brotherhood do with the Nazis. James Simpson wrote a book called The Red-Green Axis, and it's a very good book, but here's the gist of it. We are now seeing communists, Marxists, socialists, red, right? Red, joining with the globalists, green, because of using environmentalism and all the earth stuff, right? We're killing the planet, we need to reduce population, all of the Agenda 21, Agenda 30 stuff, if you're familiar with that stuff. And green, the Islamists. So now we're seeing these forces together. Well, I personally saw that when I was in St. Cloud, Minnesota in September, when the groups that were protesting me, we had the Interfaith Coalition, the Muslim Student Association, Antifa, and Black Lives Matter, because they're joining, the Brotherhood, that is joining other radical groups. Nihad Awad, the head of CARE, told us that in 2015 at a Muslim American Society ICNA conference, where he said this exact quote. I have the video, I don't have time to show it. He said they were talking about Muslim voting and mobilizing 1 million Muslim voters for the 2016 election. He said, turn your Islamic centers, your mosques, into polling stations. They're going hyper-political. He said, Black Lives Matter is our matter. Black Lives Matter is our campaign. So the Muslim Brotherhood joined forces with Black Lives Matter. Then we saw the Muslim Brotherhood join forces with certain aspects of Antifa. Now we're seeing, as I'll show you tomorrow, the Muslim Brotherhood joining forces with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they're joining forces, of course, with all these interfaith coalition groups, including many evangelicals. There was 2 guys in the White House that were working for President Trump, Rich Higgins and Derek Harvey, who actually wrote a memo on this red-green axis to get it to President Trump. Warning, I have included a copy of that memo. Robert, it's actually on your website, I believe, right? At Dean Ministries. Is that where all our information is? There's a copy of that memo as one of the files that I gave you guys to look at if you want to read it. In that memo, he warns President Trump of this coalition. Mr. President, we're now seeing the globalist, the cultural Marxist, the socialist communist, the media, the establishment Republicans, the Democrats, and the Islamists all joining forces to overthrow this nation and to come against you and to overthrow you. Be warned, Mr. President. And Rich Higgins even quotes out of the explanatory memorandum mission statement of the Muslim Brotherhood. This guy nails it. The memo gets to the desk, and we know this because of Phil Haney, because Phil now is traveling with Rich Higgins and trying to bring him to light. We know because the memo got to the desk of H.R. McMaster. Well, we don't know if he's a Muslim, but he's certainly a sympathizer. He came in after, remember, Flynn was fired, and immediately the narrative changed. No more radical Islam, radical Islam. Now, we got to be careful. We can't say that term. ISIL. Everything that we saw from Obama is in McMaster. And McMaster got the memo, called Higgins into his office. Did you write this? Yes, you're fired. And they were escorted out of the White House. We don't know if the memo ever got to the desk of the president. It needs to get to the desk of our president. But the question is, who's going to stand with our president? And is the Christian community going to be aware of what is going on? Folks, this is a real existential threat. Not just spiritually, which we'll talk about tomorrow, but as a national security threat. Because we have been infiltrated at the deepest, highest levels, and we're being destroyed from within. Isn't that exactly what they said that they're going to do? And whose hands are they going to use? Ours. So, a couple of very quick things as we wrap up. Continue to pray for God to expose these things. We've seen an exposing with the FBI and DOJ, right? And the corruption that was at the upper levels. We need to label the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. President Trump has said he was going to do it. Senator Ted Cruz from Texas had a bill ready to go in the Senate to do it. If that happened, we'd be back in the ballgame as far as our nation is concerned, national security. Until that happens, we're going down this road, and it's a matter of time. And I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I'm just telling you, based on historical fact and evidence and Europe, it's just a matter of time before they will start declaring the United States of America is Dar el-Islam. We're seeing all these signs of them preparing to get to the upper house, and it's just a matter of time. We need to reopen the Holy Land Foundation trial. The Justice Department could, by the way, the Justice Department could do both of those if they decided to. President Trump could give a directive to the Justice Department to do those things. We need to encourage local law enforcement and elected officials to stop working with the Muslim Brotherhood. Stop going to their mosques. Giving them credibility. And the Broward County Sheriff should be recalled. And that deputy should be arrested for treason. He is a spy. Because if it's Muslim Brotherhood, if it's CARE, it's Hamas. Does that make sense? If it's CARE, it's Hamas. And as long as Hamas is a terrorist organization, according to the State Department's list of terrorist groups, then any support of that is a criminal act in this nation. We just don't treat it as such. So, with that said, folks, the final thing is it comes all back to us. I'll show you tomorrow when our churches are inviting CARE, when Rick Warren goes and speaks at ISNA conferences, when Matt Chandler is sending staff to ISNA conferences, when we as the church are engaging with not just any Muslims, but the Muslim Brotherhood, then it's on us. It's on us. It begins here in the house of God. If we don't have wisdom on this, you think our elected officials are going to have wisdom? Our nation is going to have wisdom? If we don't seek to understand gentle as doves, wise as serpents. So with that said, I know this is heavy stuff, but we have to know, this is a short snippet of a longer presentation that I do for law enforcement. But was that eye-opening? You can see how people have no clue what is going on. And sadly, when our law enforcement, the people that are supposed to keep us safe, have no clue, and they're mixing with the same very people that want to harm us, that's a trouble. So God bless you guys, and we'll pick back up after lunch, right? Yeah. All right. Are we going to do one question? I believe Pastor said we're going to do one question. No? Maybe? No questions. Oh, we'll do questions. Maybe more than one question.
Okay, well, I will do more questions later. I got questions that have come in. Okay. I have questions that have come in from your friend.
My friend.
Yeah, your friend. Clifton Dolly.
Oh, Clifton, yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So that's setting you up. His first question, have Shia Muslims and Ahmadi Muslims separated from and disavowed association for Muslim Brotherhood-related organizations? What are your thoughts?
Shia Muslims, no. We know, well, there is no Shia groups per se. The government of Iran works with the Muslim Brotherhood. They've had conferences together. They coordinate together. So on a global scale, no. Maybe individual Shia Muslims. The Ahmadiyya Muslims have distanced themselves, yes, from the Muslim Brotherhood. But remember I told you last night, the Ahmadiyya Muslims are a cult within Islam. They're considered a cult. So these are the peaceful Muslims who deny abrogation, deny any of those latter verses. They don't want to live by those. The problem is they don't deny Muhammad. So they're going to have a problem theologically and scripturally because within Islam, they're not normative. Does that make sense? They're not scriptural Muslims. They're outcasts. So yes, the Ahmadiyya in many cases have denounced the Muslim Brotherhood and would agree that the Muslim Brotherhood should be labeled a terrorist organization as UAE, as I said, and Egypt has done.
Right. Okay. This is from Jim in Wichita, Kansas. How does the Muslim population boom in infiltrated countries fit into the Muslim Brotherhood strategy? Is producing large families part of the Quran to overtake other countries, or is it mainly expected by jihad or violence? We've noticed a Muslim boom in parts of our city, and it seems that each family has half a dozen kids.
Great question for Jim. Hang on, we're going to talk about that after lunch. That's exactly what I'm going to be talking about when I talk about refugee resettlement and the role of population, birth rate, within that refugee resettlement and the strategy of Islam.
Okay.
So great question. Hang on, Jim, and we'll answer it after the break.
The video you showed of the sheriff.
Yes, sir.
Is that available somewhere?
It is.
Where can we find that video?
That was done by the link to it. Well, the best way is I can just send you the links. I'll put it on the flash drive. Okay. And I can give it, and you guys can put it on your website. Is that okay?
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll do that for you this afternoon.
Yeah, we'll
you got
it on the website.
Yeah.
I'll put it on my Facebook page, and we'll get that out there.
It's a group called, West United. I think it's tied to Alan West's group that did that video.
Okay.
So I'll get that link for you guys. But the actual, if you want to watch the whole video on YouTube, just type in Scott Israel, Broward County at the mosque. That video will pop up of Nazar Hamzi, that he begins the introduction with all the Muslim salutations and praising Allah, and then he introduces Israel, and then they have a talk. The whole video is also